DAR chapter with us tonight. I don't know if I should introduce you in 21st century terms or on 19th century terms, because I'm not even sure who each of you is portraying, and you're going to have to tell us that. So with that said, these ladies are the original founders of the Jackson-Madison Chapter, is that correct?
Yes.
Chapter of the DAR, and they have come back to visit with us for just a couple of hours tonight, time traveling. Welcome to the 21st century, and I will turn it over to whichever of you goes first.
My name is Harriet Elizabeth Sullivan, Holland, and I am the regent. But before I get started, I'd like to set the tone for our time traveling. At the end of the 19th century, the country was coming out of the years after the War of 1812 and the recent Civil War. There was a resurgence of patriotism and a colonial revival, and a love of country was moving across the country. So when women were denied being a part of the newly forming sons of the American Revolution, our founding daughters formed their own organization, the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution was formed in 1890. It was an immediate success, and word was spreading across the country as women were ready for connecting to their unified, patriotic past. The same thing was happening in Jackson at the turn of the century. Many clubs and organizations were started in the 1890s here as well. There was an insatiable desire to join something for relaxation, personal growth, and cultural improvements in the city. Some of the notable ones were the McDowell Club, the Mutual Improvement Club, Ingleside Book Club, Shakespeare's Club, all of which many of our charter members were members and organizers of these groups. So when the word and the works of the newly formed DAR reached our city, these women were ready to belong to something greater than just an organization in our city with missions that they were interested in. So there were very influential women of the city, and of course I was one of them. I was born in 1847 in South Carolina. My father was James-Madison Sullivan, and my mother Sarah Mims. My patriot was her grandfather, Hughes Sullivan of South Carolina. I moved to Jackson in 1880 with my husband, William Holland. He was a merchant and he began a store, and I'm sure that you Jacksonians remember Holland's department store that was active on up into the 90s, and I believe there's still a cement sign that when I was walking around in Jackson today that I saw that's still around that has my dearly departed, beloved husband's name and my name as well. So, then I'm sure, then I went on and joined the DAR in 1900 with my sister and my niece, and they were part of a chapter in Greenville, South Carolina. So, as you know, we went on and formed the chapter in 1901, and I understand it's the 123rd anniversary that y'all will be, that you'll be, well, I can't think of the word. Celebrating, yes. You'll be celebrating this anniversary coming up here in the next few days. thought would happen, you know, coming 123 years later. But anyway, I went on to live a very productive life with my beloved husband, and then of course I went on, I passed on at age 86, you know, after a lengthy illness, and I left my 4 children, William, John, Edith, and Carrie, which, you know, Carrie and Edith were members of the DAR as well. And I am buried over here at Riverside, and if you would like to come and visit me, they have placed a very nice, what they call a DAR marker on my grave. And I heard that there's been some talk about these daughters. I don't know where they're at tonight, but anyway, that there's been some talk that they may rededicate my grave, you know, because I was so influential in Jackson. So anyway, if you're in Riverside, you should be able to find my grave, and if you want to stop by and say hi, it'd be fine. So anyway, we'll move on to the next, the Vice-Regent, who is Elizabeth Jane Brown Gilmore, who was my Vice-Regent, and we're really good friends. Did you want to come up here and talk?
Yes.
Well, all right, we'll come up, watch you don't fall.
Oh, I won't. Thank you so much. And you know, I was out Riverside the other day, and I went by and spoke to Harriet, and I told her how much I missed her, and you know, we're not laying real close together, so I had to walk a little bit over there, and I got down in the ground there on the grass, and I got that DAR thing, and I don't like it much. It's one of those things you just stick in the ground. I want one of those big old blocks. That's what I want there, Harriet. And so when you go by and you want to leave a couple of dollars there for us to buy that, you go right ahead and do it. Because Riverside is a lovely place, and I just love it. You know, I'm as my regent said, Harriet, my good friend. I'm Elizabeth Brown Gilmore, and I'm sure you've heard of me too, because I came from a very influential family.
We were very influential.
Yes. And I was the Vice-Regent for Miss Harriet. I had one purpose, and that was to help her to complete her goals for a new Daughters of the American Revolution chapter in Jackson-Madison County. We were the first chapter that came into existence other than Memphis in West Tennessee. Now, there were 10 chapters across the state, but we didn't want Memphis to get a hold of us and try to lure us over there close to that river. We wanted a chapter right here in Jackson. So, you know, my 2 younger sisters, I had 2 sisters, Ella and Sarah. Sarah's here tonight. Ella didn't have her schedule didn't meet this. But they were involved in 1901 as well. So they've got a long history with DAR, just like I do. And I noticed something on the wall here, Harriet, and I know why this happened. Right over here, the Jackson-Madison County Library was started in 1903. Well, our chapter started in 1901. Well, guess what DAR members do, y'all? They dig around for their genealogy. Who's your mama? Who's your sister? Who's your cousin? And we needed a library. So 2 years after we formed, in 1901, 1903, we had the Jackson-Madison County Library. And I'm sure we're the reason for it. I know we are. So Miss Evelyn, if there's anything in that Tennessee room that has our name on it, be sure and let us know. I mentioned to you that my father, you all have heard of, and you all know about, Milton Brown. And God bless his soul. Us 3 girls, we loved our daddy. But you know, we had 3 brothers as well, one of which did not live very long. But you know, Mr. Brown, my daddy, sometimes he wanted people to call him Mr. Brown. He was an attorney. He was responsible for Lambeth College. He was responsible for Union University, which was Southwest University at the time. He also was the president of the railroad. But you know what he liked to do in the summer? He was also in the legislature, by the way. You know what he liked to do in the summer? He liked to go and be big shot in Mobile, Alabama. That was a summer home for a lot of folks, including us as a family. So while we were there one summer, I met this man, and oh my Lord, he just knocked me off my feet. John Gilmore. John Taylor Gilmore. And I knew the minute I laid my eyes on him, he's the smartest man I ever saw. You know, I didn't tell my daddy that, but I knew he was. And he was 20 years old, he went to Duke University, wasn't called that then, but Duke University, to be a medical doctor. He went on from Duke and he went up to Philadelphia and finished his medical career there. His internship was in Philadelphia. And then he heard about all of these wonderful medicines they had in France. This was around 1860, if that rings a bell. So he was in France studying all of these medications and everything that was going on in the medical field. And people realized what a great medical emergency mind that man had. So when he did his due in France, he came back to Mississippi, the state that he was born in, and about the time he got back to the South, he was sent as a Confederate surgeon to the Civil War. And he was well known across battles that were happening across this country as the best emergency doctor that anybody could run across. There's no telling how many lives that he saved. But one thing he did, he became sick while he was in the war. He came back to Mississippi and he worked a while, and he heard about this medical program going on in Alabama. You know, we don't think much about the exciting things going on in Alabama, but he decided that he'd go over there and check it out. So he went over to what is Southern Alabama University now, the medical school over there, and he became their star. He was absolutely a wonderful, gifted doctor. But guess what? Tuberculosis came around, consumption. And John became ill. By that time, we had 4 children, one of which only lived a couple of days. But Milton, our first child, was born in 1906. Our second, around 1868. John T. was born in 1868, the end of the year. And Mary lived just a few days. John lived only 19 months. Harvey only lived to 18, he was just 29 years old. So John was getting more and more ill. And he decided he'd go, we were in Mobile then. We'd gotten married, had these children, and he decided he would leave Mobile and he would go to Florida because, you know, their weather was better than Mobile. And because of his health, he went to Florida. At that particular time, I stayed in Mobile for just a little while, but then I had to come back home and be with my parents because I needed help with these children. But all of a sudden, 1968, I lost a child. 1969, I lost a child. And then in 1875, I lost the only daughter we had. And then John passed away as well at age 39. I have a feeling that, and it still makes me sad, and as my grandma would say, cold chills, that, you know, John was such a brilliant, brilliant man, and that's why I talk about him so much here tonight, is because not only had I lost the love of my life, ever cared anything about. But I had lost 3 children, just one right after another. That's when I went into DAR. And I think maybe that it was my salvation. Milton and I were living, that was my oldest son, we were living together on East Chester. And you know, it's amazing, none of my children ever married. So it was Milton and I, of course, named after his grandfather. And at age 39, Milton died. So I had a lot of illness, I had a lot of sickness. The loves of my life were gone, but I had my DAR chapter, and I loved every minute of it. My husband and my children meant the world to me, but my organization filled the gap of the needs that I had as an adult. I loved doing service work. I loved my friend Harriet, and I loved being involved in the city of Jackson. Of course, if I needed any help, I'd just say, well, you know, I'm Elizabeth Milton Brown's daughter, and I got pretty much whatever I needed in my chapter. So, Harriet, I'll visit you again, and you all come visit me too, because John is there. My father, my mother is at Riverside. My children are at Riverside. Now, don't you be bringing me no dead flowers. I like yellow roses. So, if you want to bring some of those, that's fine, because, you know, we are just all there at Riverside. And it is just
I bet we're in that book that lady was just talking about.
Maybe.
We might be listed in there.
But come to see us, and we'll have a good Sunday afternoon chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice-Regent, Mrs. Gilmore. And now I'd like to introduce our corresponding secretary, Fannie Ashworth Enloe.
Hello, I am Fannie Ashworth. I was born in 1851 in Wilson County, Tennessee. My family, Jasper Ashworth and Adelaide Sewell, were one of the oldest families in Tennessee. Later, I married Benjamin A. Enloe. He was a lawyer and a congressman, and we moved to Jackson, Tennessee. He became editor of the Jackson Tribune and Sun in 1876 through 1886. After becoming involved with the Nashville paper, real estate and railroad commissioner, we wound up moving back to Nashville, Lebanon area. We had a lot of friends there. While we were in Jackson, though, we did live on Long Street, and we also lived, I believe it was at 428 Campbell Street. It's been a while since I've visited there. But my friendship with the ladies in Wilson County are the reason why I joined the DAR, the National Society. They kept encouraging me to do service work, patriotic, help the veterans, teach the kids, so I did. And I loved the National Society work. She joined as a charter member and served as the corresponding secretary, and later became the chapter's third regent. Now, my husband was affiliated with becoming the railroad commissioner in Nashville. So he had a very important job too. While I associated with the ladies, he was doing some fine associations with the governor and such. But it worked out. I had 5 children, and not all of them joined. Our patriot was Benjamin Sewell out of North Carolina. He was a constitutional delegate. And was my grandfather, my great-grandfather. He lived from 1742 to 1821. He joined the Provincial Congress in 1776. Here, a member of the Council of State in 1781. To this date, we have 3 daughters that are members of the DAR, 2 granddaughters, a cousin Nanny Sewell, niece Mary Dickinson Ashworth Whithorn, and great niece Mammy Bell Gillen. So our family was really involved with service work and communications throughout the state of Tennessee and traveling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Enloe. Now we'll hear from Anne Murray Hughes, our recording secretary.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anna Murray Hughes. I'm so pleased to be here today. I was honored to be the first recording secretary for the Jackson-Madison Chapter. My application for DAR was approved in May of 1901, just a few months after my mother's was approved. I was 24 years old at the time. My parents were Peter James Murray and Eloise McPherson Murray. Sometimes my father was called PJ. Father was born on August 12, 1845 in Illinois. He supported the family as a bookkeeper and later as a manager of Jackson Oil Mills. My mother, Eloise Murray, was born on October 9, 1853 in Lafayette, Missouri. By the time she was 7 years old, her family had moved to Memphis. At the age of 17, she still resided in Memphis. My parents married on May 28, 1873, when father was 27 and mother was only 19. By the time my mother was 27, she and father lived at 208 Cumberland Street in Jackson. There were 3 of us children by then, my older brother Harriet, myself, and my younger brother Cornelius. I would have 7 more siblings by 1895. Father died on October 22nd, 1903 at the age of 58. Mother passed at the age of 75 on January 25th, 1929. Now, I was born on February 28, 1877. I attended MCFI. That stands for Memphis Conference Female Institute, which later became Lamont University. And I believe now that site is the University of Memphis. In 1910, when I was 33 years old, I was living with my mother at 316 College Street. On January 9, 1912, I married Thomas Grattan Hughes. Thomas was a prominent figure in Jackson since his early manhood. While operating a clothing store, he received an appointment as postmaster. He then relinquished his interest in the store. He was postmaster for 11 years until his death. He served as First National Bank of Jackson as vice president for 35 years and was a member of the board of directors. He had been a member of the board of mayor and aldermen of Jackson and was vice mayor of the city when its charter was changed to form a commission government in 1913. He had also served as president of the Chamber of Commerce. Thomas and I had 2 children, a son, Thomas Grattan Hughes Jr., born in 1915, and a daughter, Cornelia McPherson Hughes, born in 1917. Unfortunately, Thomas Jr. lived only a month, but Cornelia attended Union College and then graduated from the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester. She married Curtis Shake from Indiana, and then they resided in West Virginia. My husband Thomas passed on April 5th, 1944, at the age of 73, and I continued to live a very active social life, working with the Women's Auxiliary at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and I was a spokesperson for the Red Cross during the war, World War II, that is. My charming home was a site of many social entertainments, and I will say that Anna Murray Hughes passed away on May 31st, 1953, at the age of 76. That was about 100 years from the birth of her mother, who was born in 1853. And while while I was researching this, I found it interesting that I was born in 1953. But we've all got a lot in common.
Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. Next, we'll hear, from our treasurer, Katherine Jane Royster Bond. Do you want me to hand you the microphone?
Hello to everyone. I am Katherine Jane Royster Bond, but you can call me Kate. I was born June 24th, 1851, in Granville County, North Carolina, to Colonel Stephen Sampson Royster and Jane Elizabeth Robards. While visiting in Jackson, Tennessee, I met Chester George Bond. He was called Chess by his friends. We married in 1872 when he was 25 and I was 21. I would never have gotten him had it been leap year that year. Chester was born December 14th, 1846 at Elmwood Place, the home of his maternal grandfather, Robert Chester. Elmwood Place was known as the Heron Farm on Chester Levee Road, which many years later led to the cotton mill town of Bemis that began in 1900. Chester's mother, Mary Chester Bond, died 10 days after his birth. When he was 4 years old, his father, George Bond, died. Chester was raised by his great aunt, Narcissa Hayes. She was the sister of General Samuel Hayes and the sister-in-law of General William Edward Butler. Chess and his Aunt Nar enjoyed fishing in the Forked Deer. He had incidents with the Yankees when they occupied Jackson. He joined the Confederate Army when he was 17 and a half, and he served in the Nathan Bedford Forrest Cavalry. After the war, he continued his studies and became a lawyer, and later became a judge. He had a fear of girls when he was a boy and a young man. After we married, we were visited by a friend, Albert Stevens, who wanted to see what kind of woman had overcome Chester's fear. I would say it was because she was a very fine and kind woman. We began housekeeping very humbly. In the early days, we ate from the dry goods box. We began building our beautiful home at 403 East Baltimore in 1875, and were able to finish only 2 rooms at that time. Our front porch was 2 boards on the ground from the steps of the door. Many years later, Chester brought the first phone system to Jackson. We were the talk of the town. In May of 1972, the Jackson Sun published pictures of our mantles. You have probably visited my beautiful home, which is now known as Lawrence and Sorensen Funeral Home. We were members of the First Presbyterian Church. On Sunday, September 19, 1926, the Jackson Sun published an article written by Chester's friend Eleanor Hayes Stiegel, titled Judge Chester G. Bond, Portrait of an Early Settler of Madison County. I passed in October 4th of 1916 at age 65. Chester died February 22nd, 1938 at age 91. We and our children made our final resting place in Riverside Cemetery, except for our son Robert, who was buried at Hollywood Cemetery. My death record reads, on the evening of October 4th, Mrs. Bond, age 65, wife of Chester Bond, died in the evening at the family residence. News of my death was received throughout the city with expressions of sincere regret and profound sorrow. I was the type of Christian woman, a useful and helpful member of the First Presbyterian Church, of which her bereaved husband was the ruling elder. She had been ill for several weeks, suffering an organic heart trouble, but it was only during the past few days that her condition became alarming. Mrs. Bond was greatly beloved in Jackson, where she lived since her marriage to Chester Bond, a then young attorney in 1872. She is survived by her husband Chester, her daughter Mrs. Allen Campbell, and 2 sons, Chester Bond Jr. and Robert Bond. In 1948, my namesake granddaughter, Katherine Royster Bond, married Alexander Brown Dancy Jr., grandson of one of our later chapter treasurers, Sarah Brown Dancy. I am honored to be a charter member of, and the first treasurer of the Jackson-Madison Chapter DAR, joining DAR under the Patriot of Thomas Watkins.
Thank you, Mrs. Bond. Now we'll hear from our registrar, Sophia Reid.
Good evening to you all. I am a teacher, so it is wonderful to be in front of a group again. I am Sophia Beatty Reid, the first registrar of the Jackson-Madison Chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's most curious, but a pleasure to journey forward to this day and behold the many changes while recounting my life story. I was born in the year of our Lord, 1855, in Duplin County, North Carolina, to David Reid and Sophia Gibbs Beatty Reid. As you might surmise, I was named in honor of my dear mother. My father was an attorney, and not long after my birth, we relocated to Madison County, Tennessee, to an area known as Denmark. My grandfather and uncles were already established there as early settlers, cultivating cotton. My uncle, James W. Reid, had a grand white house and property which still stands to this day. Regrettably, my father departed this life in 1858. I believe he sensed his illness and wished for my mother to be near family upon his passing. His brothers were appointed as our guardians. Although I scarcely had the opportunity to know my father, he bequeathed to us a treasury of books from which we gleaned much learning. We attended school in Denmark, and eventually our mother moved us to the city of Jackson, where we resided on Main Street. I never entered into matrimony, and by 1901 I had devoted 18 years to the noble profession of teaching. I was regarded as a shrewd businesswoman, holding stock in the local building and loan. I owned 3 houses on North Royal facing Main Street. Jackson boasted several women's organizations, but my passion for history and research drew me to the DAR chapter forming in Jackson. Thus I joined and became the first registrar of the Jackson chapter. In those times, the connections to our forefathers made the research much less arduous. My patriot was my paternal great-grandfather, John Ramsey, who provided information. My sister, Leila Caldwell, born in 1857, was likewise a chapter member of the new chapter. Many delightful DAR meetings were convened at her elegant house on College Street until her death in 1936. She endured much sorrow herself, losing her first husband at the tender age of 22 and her second husband, Dan Caldwell, a distinguished businessman in Jackson, in 1904 after only 8 years of marriage. He succumbed to a heart attack on a train journey to Hot Springs, Arkansas. Our cousin in the city, Leila Johnston Harris, was also a charter member. Our paternal grandmothers were sisters. Alas, I fell ill after surgery and departed this life at the Douglas Infirmary in Nashville on June 25, 1903, at the age of 48. At the time of my death, I proudly served as the assistant principal of the intermediate department of Jackson Schools. I had the honor of visiting here once before when the chapter celebrated its 120th anniversary in 2021. It was with great satisfaction that I observed the progress of the Jackson DAR chapter and the city of Jackson. It filled me with pride to hear that I had been held in high esteem as a teacher and had left a lasting impression on many. A page of the year-end education report to the state was dedicated to me. It's been most delightful to converse with all of you with such splendid gathering of historically minded individuals. But now, I think I'm going to make my way to Riverside Cemetery to ascertain if the curbing that I requested in my will was indeed put up.
Thank you, Mrs. Reid. like a lot of us are over at Riverside. Now we'll hear from Sarah Brown Dancy, our historian.
Well, hello, it is so good to be back in Jackson. I am Sarah Torian Brown Dancy. I joined DAR in April 1901 with my dear sister Elizabeth and our other sister Ella. We were privileged to assist in organizing the Jackson-Madison Chapter, and I had the honor of serving as the first chapter historian and the 5th chapter regent. I brought 2 of our membership ledgers with me tonight. They're very old, so if you just take a quick glance at them as you start to leave. But we're so proud to have those. They contain members' names, national numbers, join dates, list of chapter officers, and our patrons' names. Much of this information was recorded by Mary Timberlake. She was not a charter member, but she joined as quickly as she could, and she served as Vice-Regent, historian, and the 13th regent. And we do have our books scanned. I mean, this modern day and age, I'm just surprised at everything that you have in the world today, but we have those scanned and they're on our website for any of our members to look through them online. I was born in Tennessee in 1845 to Milton Brown and Sarah Frances Torian. Now, the early families in Jackson had a tradition of naming their daughters after their mothers. So both my mother and I were named Sarah Torian Brown. Torian was her maiden name and my middle name. My mother was from Halifax County, Virginia. She was known for her fair skin, black hair, and brown eyes. It was said my father was charmed at her by first sight. She passed away at age 58 in 1876 and was laid to rest in Riverside Cemetery. My father was born in Ohio in 1804. He moved to Nashville at age 19, then to Paris, Tennessee, and finally to Jackson in 1832. He married my mother in Paris, Tennessee in 1835 and became a prominent figure in Jackson's history. He was a lawyer, judge, U.S. congressman, president of the Mississippi and Tennessee Central Railroad Company and the Mobile and Ohio Railroad Company. In 1845, the year I was born, he introduced a resolution to Congress calling for Texas annexation into the Union. The Brown Bill passed the House of Representatives in January of 1845 and passed the Senate on February the 27th. He was instrumental in founding Union University, Lamont University, Lane College, and Vanderbilt University. Mrs. Vanderbilt was my Sunday school teacher. Our winter home was in Mobile, Alabama, as my sister has already told you earlier, and Mrs. Vanderbilt introduced my father to her husband, Cornelius Vanderbilt. This friendship led to Commodore Vanderbilt's generous endowment to Vanderbilt University in honor of his Southern wife. Now, I was quoted in the Jackson Sun sharing that story in 1964 and 1962, long after my passing. And Vanderbilt University's mascot, the Commodore, is a nod to this legacy. My father fought tirelessly for 24 years to bring the railroad to Jackson, and it finally arrived in 1857. The first train into Jackson bore his name, Judge Milton Brown, in large letters on both sides of the engine. In 2010, a restored GM&O Pullman rail car was dedicated in his memory at Casey Jones Village in Jackson. That's a site that was just farmland during my lifetime. Father passed away in 1883 at age 80, and his death was widely reported across Tennessee. Now, I graduated from the Methodist Conference Female Institute in Jackson, now the Lamont campus of Memphis State University, and I continued my studies for a year in Paris, France, not Tennessee, Paris, France. In 1875, I married Colonel Clifton Dancy from Mississippi. He was a traveling salesman, and together we had 3 children. Continuing our naming tradition, we named our only daughter Sarah Brown Dancy. youngest child, Clifton Brown Dancy, lived age 88, passing in 1976. He was survived by his niece, Mary. All three of our children carried the Brown name as their middle name. Now, I lived 87 years, 9 months, and 1 day, passing away on September the 19th, 1933, at my home at 141 Terrace Place in Jackson. My death came just 3 months after my son Alex's death. The Nashville Banner noted I was possibly the most widely known woman in Jackson. Don't tell Patty. And the Commercial Appeal remarked on September the 20th, 1933, that I annually awarded the Milton Brown Composition Medal to high school students on behalf of the DAR chapter. Now, 15 years after my passing in 1948, the Jackson Sun published an article about a paper that I prepared for the DAR in 1922. It was titled, Mrs. Dancy's Recollections Recreate the Days of War and Reconstruction. My paper included fond memories of my mammy taking her to church meetings. She would hold me on one arm and keep the other arm free to wave to her friends and talk to all her friends. I really enjoyed that, even as a baby. But my paper also included sad memories, such as the hard years when our territory was under Northern occupation. My descendants reside in Jackson, including great-great-great-grandchildren. And many of you may know my great-granddaughter, Nora Dancy Snow Alexander, the widow of Harvard Lee Rice Alexander Sr., who served as Madison County historian for a total of about 30 years until his passing in 2022. I really enjoyed my visit with you today. Thank you for having us come by.
Thank you, Mrs. Dancy. Now we will hear from Katherine Campbell Robertson, our librarian.
I'd like to introduce myself. I am Katherine Campbell Robertson. My friends call me Kate. My family lived in Madison County since the 1860s. My father, Alexander William Campbell, was born in 1828 in Nashville. He married my mother, Ann Dixon Allen, from Wilson County in 1851. And he was a practicing attorney for many years. My parents had 6 children: Dixon, Allen, Lula, Annie, John, William, myself, and Alexander. And we were living on Lafayette Street by 1880. Besides being a lawyer, my father fought in the 33rd Tennessee Infantry for the Confederacy in the war between the states. He entered the war in October 1861 as a colonel in Nashville. He went on to be injured in the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. Then a promotion to Brigadier General in 1864, where he stayed until the close of the war. He returned to Jackson and his family. In 1871, I was born in Jackson. I led a normal childhood with my brothers and sisters, and at age 23, I met and fell in love with George Noble Harris Robertson. We were married on June 21st, 1894, in Madison County. Eventually, I had 4 sons: William Platt, Alexander, George Harris Jr., and lastly, Alan Dixon by 1902. Raising 4 rambunctious little boys gave me little time to serve as an officer in DAR, but I was an originating member. I did hold their ideals to my own heart, and in 1901 I applied for my Patriot William Campbell in the first DAR chapter. He was a lieutenant and a captain in the Virginia line, born in 1758, and he died in 1800, Lexington, Kentucky. My life continued on as I helped start PTA associations in Tennessee, forming standards they would use in the future. I kept an eye on civics issues, considered running for legislature, and studied law and graduated from Lebanon University, although I never practiced law in a business setting. I believe in the suffrage movement and felt women should have a voice in America. I have always held a spiritual belief where I focused my church work at St. Luke's Episcopal, which also reflected in my writings, poems, and enjoyment of the Ingleside Book Club. I left Jackson in 1916 after divorcing my husband. He died in 1946, where he and his second wife are buried in Glendale, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. While spending time in Washington and returning to Nashville in 1930, I wrote the book Edgewood Rose. I was known as a writer and living my last 7 years in Memphis, but Jackson was always my heart and my home. My memory lives on in a trust, funding Kate Campbell Robertson Park in Jackson, which my beloved sons gave to their mother.
Thank you, Mrs. Robertson. That was very early divorce that you got from your husband in 1916.
I think what I wanted to do with my life.
Right, I mean, now we'll hear from Emma Dorothy Botts Robbins. And what were you again?
I was a board member.
A board member, okay. I could have, I'm sorry, you know, it's
It's been a while.
yeah, it's been a while.
I am the spirit of Emma Dorothy Botts Robbins. I'm speaking through the voice of this amateur actress because my story begins and ends after my life, even though I lived to nearly 90. I was born in 1870 and was reared here in Jackson. I attended, now I'm a little discombobulated, disoriented. I attended Memphis Conference Female Institute, like some folks, but it was down close to the Methodist Church. And of course, that building burned in 1912, but they rebuilt that. But the Institute's not there anymore. It moved, became Lambeth, and then it closed in 2011. I think it's the University of Memphis, I think. Then after the Institute, I went to finishing school in New York. I could tell this actress never went. And this, I hear this is the library. Well, I'm used to the library being down the street and being founded by Mr. Cordagi or endowed. I'm glad to be here. I married my husband in 1898. His name was James Robbins, and he was a traveling salesman. So we had a daughter, but I was thrilled to be a chartered member of the Jackson-Madison Chapter of DAR. It was an opportunity for me to socialize, make friends, get out of the house, and do some service work. Unfortunately, I lost my husband in 1922, and I didn't pass till 1960, so I was a widow now to 40 years, and it was a blessing to have He's in Riverside Cemetery. Yeah, with a lot of my friends, and I am too.
Are y'all beside each other?
Yes, even though
But y'all didn't get a divorce. I'm sorry.
No, but
No, he just died long ago.
he was, yeah, and, he traveled a lot. Stood, lived with me. Let's see, but I was proud of my patron. His name was Benjamin Tover. And he served 3 different tours, they might now call it, in the Revolutionary War. And the last one was probably the most famous because he was at Yorktown when Lord Cornwallis surrendered, and he got to hear the British band play "The World Turned Upside Down." So I'm proud of that. He's buried in the Bowers Chapel Cemetery, 641 Gibson Wells Brazil Road in Humboldt, though it's really out in the country. My spirit was traveling by there, and we saw that our chapter in 2023 had left one of those big block markers, big block markers, in honor of Mr. Tover. Well, I better get back to either Riverside or the Presbyterian part of heaven, because I was a faithful member of the Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Mrs. Robbins. Now we'll hear from Caroline. No, you know Caroline.
No, I'm Mary Elizabeth.
You married
Eliza Bond.
Bond. And you are our
Mr. Charter.
charter member.
Mr. Charter.
You resemble my dog.
I saw your daughter just the other day when I was walking through the cemetery. She said, well, I know you know, she says hi. Well, good evening. I am Mary Eliza Bond. I was born the 12th of August, 1869 to David Lawson and Eliza Andrews Balk. Remember that name? In Franklin, Williamson County, Tennessee. I add Williamson County because some of you people think of Franklin and you think that it may be Franklin County, but it was Williamson County. I was the baby of the family, so you can draw whatever conclusion you want. When I was about 2, Father, who was a printer, moved us to Jackson, Tennessee so that he could work on the newspaper, and it was the Whig at that time. And my brothers, some of my brothers would follow in his footsteps. I attended public schools in Jackson before attending, like many of my former charter members, the Memphis Conference Female Institute here in Jackson. I was Methodist, so it was my college. I married James P. Bond, 18 October 1893 at the First Methodist Church here in Jackson. Now, it's not in the same spot anymore, but well, it is in the same spot. It's downtown. It's one of the few churches that stayed downtown. Unfortunately, there's very little known about my husband. Our marriage made it in the Memphis paper, but his death didn't. And I'm sorry to say that people don't know my beloved husband very well. He died shortly after our marriage. We had a daughter who died too. So I was a very young widow, and I chose not to marry again. I do want to add, because I'm proud of this, my maternal grandfather was a Methodist minister. Instead of finding another husband, I dedicated my life to teaching. And I taught first grade. Now, you all know how important first grade is. And I taught at Alexander School. Now, what's exciting, as I walked from Riverside, I noticed that Alexander School is still there, and it's still teaching first graders. Now, I'm gonna add that this lady who's standing here, her son attended Alexander School as a first grader. But we're going. I taught for 45 years. I also served as a principal of Alexander and a principal of West Jackson. On the 14th of June, 1901, which you all now call Flag Day, wasn't that then, I helped to charter the Jackson-Madison Chapter National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. I was the first person in the National Society to prove my lineage to Amos Balk of North Carolina. And I take personal privilege to tell you that I counted 41 other women have now proven their lineage to Amos Balk for the National Society. And he's not redlined. Ladies, you know what that means now. He is still, it is not a good thing to be redlined by the DAR. I was also excited, as I did my tour today. I walked through this park that's new. It's called Liberty Park Conservatory. And they have all these beautiful 13-star flags. And right there, on one of the first rows, is my beloved great-grandfather, Amos Balk. So you go walk through that cemetery, that, I guess we could call it, they use cemetery markers to mark all flags, so. Go walk through that. They tell me it's gonna be up through 8 o'clock, July the 6th morning. So go walk through it and pay respects to Amos Balk. If you wanna know more about him, he had a pension. Now, I did during the August 12th meeting in 1901 at the Southern Hotel, I presented a paper on Madison, the half of our name for our chapter. My paper was said to have given ample justice when the meeting was reported by the 15th September Jackson's son. Now, one of the saddest times in our family's life was when we received news that Captain William H. Bill Scott, who had graduated from West Point, was killed in action in Germany the 12th of October in 1945. We met when the military brought him home in 1948, and he was laid to rest with our family in Riverside on the 20th of November, 1948. The DAR supports our veterans. My beloved nephew Bill is among those whom we remember today. I was living with my beloved niece, Mary Eliza Balk Scott, who was the mother of Bill, her only child. Mary Eliza, can you tell she was named for me? She was also in the field of teaching. She followed me there, and she also followed me in with these beloved women. My death made the front page of the Jackson Sun on the 14th October 1955 issue. The front page. Now, as one of our later members said, it wasn't above the fold, but it was there. My earthly remains have joined my family members in the Riverside Cemetery and so many of my
you know, in 1901, women did not have the right to vote. And these ladies, including myself, we were trailblazers. We saw a vision and we acted on it. We formed this chapter 123 years ago, and it's still going strong. We have 175 members today, and we're proud of that. We're proud of our service to God, home, and country. We have lots of activities that we participate in. A big one is our, Mrs. Bond said. We support our veterans. Veterans are very, very important to us. We support our women. We support children. We have many, many, many projects that we support. In conclusion, I want to thank our chapter members who have worked so hard to present this city tonight. And